The cafe was too bright for what was about to happen. Sunlight poured through the tall front windows of Bellamy's cafe, catching on silver spoons, white coffee cups, and the lunch rush had filled every table. Businessmen leaned over laptops. A mother cut pancakes for her daughter. Two college girls whispered over iced coffees. Everything smelled like roasted espresso, buttered toast, and fresh rain drying on the sidewalk outside. Sophie moved carefully between the tables, with one hand beneath her tray and the other resting unconsciously against her stomach. 7 months pregnant. She had learned to move slowly, breathe through pressure, and smile even when her feet ached badly enough to make her eyes burn. She was good at pretending. She had been pretending for years. Pretending Kyle Mercer's cruelty was love. Pretending she did not flinch when someone raised their voice. Pretending she was not terrified every time a black SUV slowed near the cafe window. Pretending the ring on her finger was not both the safest and most dangerous thing she owned. She was setting down a cappuccino when the cafe door opened. The little bell above it rang once. Sophie froze. Every instinct in her body recognized him before her eyes did. Kyle Mercer stepped inside wearing a navy suit, expensive shoes, and the same smile he used whenever he wanted the world to believe he was harmless. He looked like a man who had never lost anything because he believed everything could be taken back by force. His gaze found Sophie immediately. For a moment, the cafe noise thinned. The hiss of the espresso machine faded. The scrape of forks softened. Sophie felt the baby shift beneath her ribs, as if even her unborn child had sensed the danger walking toward them. Kyle smiled wider. "Well," he said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Look at you." Sophie straightened. Tray pressed against her side. "Kyle, you need to leave." He looked down at her belly, then at her left hand. His smile died. Sophie tried to pull her hand behind her back, but he saw the ring before she could hide it. Something ugly moved across his face. "No," he said softly. "No. No. No." "What is that?" Sophie's throat tightened. "Don't do this here." Kyle laughed, but there was no humor in it. He stepped closer, forcing her backward until her hip touched the edge of a table. A cup rattled against a saucer. Customers began to look over. "You got married," he said. Sophie's cheeks burned. "Lower your voice." "To who?" Kyle demanded. "Some poor idiot who felt sorry for you," she swallowed. Her fingers curled protectively over her stomach. Kyle saw it and leaned closer, his voice turning cruel. "Did you tell him?" he asked. "Did you tell him you're carrying another man's child? Or did you trap him with those sad eyes and that little helpless act?" Sophie's face went pale. The words struck exactly where he intended them to, not because they were true, but because Kyle knew humiliation had always been his sharpest weapon. He did not need facts. He only needed an audience. A man at the counter looked away. The college girls stopped whispering. The mother pulled her little girl closer. "Kyle," Sophie said, her voice trembling but firm. "Move." He looked at her ring again, then he grabbed her wrist. The tray slipped from Sophie's hand and crashed to the floor. The sound shattered through the cafe. Coffee splashed across white tile. Silverware scattered beneath chairs. Sophie gasped as Kyle tightened his grip, twisting her hand up between them. "Take it off," he snapped. Pain flashed through her wrist. "Let go. You don't get to wear a ring like that." Kyle said, "Not after me. Not with his kid inside you. No real man would marry a woman like you." Sophie tried to pull away, but he yanked her closer. "Take it off." He reached for the ring, and then the entire cafe went silent. Not quieter, silent. The kind of silence that made people stop breathing before they understood why. At the back table, A man stood. He had been sitting alone beneath the shadow of the exposed brick wall. Untouched espresso in front of him. Black coat folded over the chair beside him. Until that moment, most people had not noticed him. He had the kind of stillness that did not ask for attention because it already owned the room. Matteo De Luca rose slowly. Two men in black suits stood behind him. Then two more near the door. Sophie's heart stopped. Matteo's eyes were not on Kyle's face. They were on Kyle's hand wrapped around her wrist. When he spoke, his voice was calm, too calm. "Touch my wife again," Matteo said, "and you will leave this cafe with less than you brought in." Kyle's grip loosened. Sophie sucked in a shaking breath. The word wife hung in the air like a struck match. Kyle turned. Confusion, twisting into disbelief. "Who the hell are you?" No one answered at first. They did not need to. Around the cafe, recognition spread like cold water. One businessman lowered his phone. A woman near the window whispered, "That's Matteo De Luca." Kyle heard it. His face changed. Everyone in Boston knew the De Luca name. Even if they pretended not to. They knew it from sealed indictments that never became convictions. From restaurants that opened overnight and rivals who disappeared from boardrooms. From luxury hotels, private harbors, quiet judges, and men who never raised their voices because other people did their screaming for them. Matteo walked forward. Not fast. Not angry. That was what made it worse. He moved like a man with nothing to prove because the city had already learned the cost of testing him. Sophie's pulse thundered in her ears. She should have felt rescued. Some part of her did. Another part, the wounded and stubborn part that had survived men who confused protection with possession. I wanted to run from both of them. Matteo stopped close enough that Kyle had to tilt his head back to meet his eyes. "Release her," Matteo said. Kyle let go. Sophie pulled her wrist to her chest. A red mark bloomed where his fingers had been. Matteo saw it. The muscle in his jaw flexed once. That was the only warning. One of Matteo's bodyguards stepped beside Kyle. Not touching him. Not yet. Kyle took a step back anyway. "This is a joke," Kyle said, but his voice had cracked. "She's not your wife." Matteo reached for Sophie's hand. He did not grab. He did not demand. He offered his palm. Waiting. Sophie looked at it. The cafe watched her. Her wrist hurt. Her stomach tightened with stress. Her pride screamed not to let another powerful man decide the shape of her life in public, but Matteo's hand stayed open. That was the difference. Slowly, Sophie placed her hand in his. Matteo turned her palm upward and looked at the ring he had placed there 16 days ago in a courthouse before sunrise. With no flowers, no music, and four armed men standing outside the door. Then he lifted her hand. Not to show ownership, but proof. "I put that ring on her finger," he said. "If anyone wants it removed, they ask me." Kyle's face flushed. "You have no idea what she is." Matteo's gaze went colder. "I know exactly what she is." He looked at Sophie then, and for one dangerous second, the room disappeared. "She is the only person in this city who ever saved me without asking what I was worth." Sophie's breath caught. Kyle stared between them, hatred turning his face sharp. "This isn't over," he said. Matteo leaned in slightly. "No," he agreed. "It is not." A bodyguard opened the cafe door. Kyle hesitated. Humiliated now in the same public way he had tried to humiliate her. Then he walked out. Shoulders stiff. Face burning. The bell above the door ringing weakly behind him. No one spoke. Sophie pulled her hand from Matteo's. "I told you not to come here," she whispered. His eyes dropped to her wrist again. "And I told you he would come back. I had a shift. You had protection. I had bills. His mouth tightened. You have me. The words landed too heavily, too intimately. Sophie looked away first, because the dangerous truth was not that Matteo De Luca had claimed her in front of everyone. The dangerous truth was that some broken part of her had wanted him to. 6 months earlier, Sophie Lane had known Matteo De Luca by another name. Matt. Just Matt. He had walked into Bellamy's cafe at 1143 p.m. on a Thursday, when the city outside was drowning in rain and Sophie was working the closing shift alone. He wore a black suit beneath a dark wool coat, his hair damp, his face unreadable. He ordered black coffee and sat in the corner booth with his back to the wall. Sophie noticed three things immediately. He tipped before he drank. He watched exits instead of people. And there was blood on his cuff. She had almost called the police. Then two men entered the cafe. They were not customers. Sophie knew it before they spoke. Their coats were too clean for the rain. Their eyes moved too quickly. One kept his right hand inside his jacket. The man in the corner booth did not turn around, but his fingers tightened once around his coffee cup. Sophie had been afraid of dangerous men before. Kyle had taught her that danger did not always arrive with guns. Sometimes it arrived with flowers and apologies. Sometimes it smiled at your friends and crushed your wrist beneath the dinner table. But this danger was different. It was quiet, controlled, and bleeding. The two men asked for the back exit. Sophie pointed them toward the hallway. Then, without thinking, she walked to the corner booth and said, "Storage room." Now, the man looked up. His eyes were dark, almost black, and so steady they should have frightened her more than they did. "You know who I am?" he asked. "No," Sophie said, "but I know they're not here for coffee." A flicker of something crossed his face. Amusement, maybe, or surprise. He stood and followed her through the kitchen into the storage room. She pushed him inside, shut the door, and knocked over a stack of empty crates to block it from view. When the men returned, she was mopping the floor. "Anyone leave?" one asked. Sophie looked at him with the exhausted boredom of a waitress who had dealt with drunk customers, cheating husbands, angry mothers, and men who thought kindness was an invitation. "Only my patience," she said. They left 5 minutes later. When Sophie opened the storage room, the man was leaning against the shelves, one hand pressed to his ribs. "You are either very brave," he said, "or very foolish." Sophie grabbed a clean towel. "Most women are both." "Sit down." He obeyed. That should have been her first warning. Men like him did not obey unless they chose to. She cleaned the cut beneath his ribs with shaking hands. He watched her face, not her hands. "You didn't ask what happened," he said. "I don't want to know." "You should." "I really shouldn't." He almost smiled. "What is your name?" he asked. "Sophie." "Sophie?" he repeated, like he was testing how it felt in his mouth. She glanced at him, and yours a pause. "Matt." It was a lie. She knew it. But she accepted it because some lies were safer than truth. For 3 weeks after that night, he came back to the cafe near closing. Always alone. Always taking the corner booth. Always ordering black coffee he barely drank. He never flirted the way other men did. He did not ask where she lived. He did not touch her. He did not offer to fix her life. That was why she began talking to him. Not about everything. Never Kyle. Never the bruises that had faded from her wrist months after the breakup. But small things. Her dream of owning a bakery cafe. Her mother's old recipe cards. The tiny apartment above a laundromat where the pipes screamed every morning at 6. The way she hated being underestimated because she was soft-spoken. Matt listened like every word mattered. That was more dangerous than any gun. Then one night, Kyle came in drunk. He had found out where she worked. He stood at the counter and smiled like he had brought nostalgia instead of poison. "Come on, Soph," he said. "You can still be mad." She told him to leave. He laughed. Matt stood from the back booth. Kyle saw him and sneered. "Who's this, your rebound?" Matt did not answer. He simply looked at Kyle. Kyle left without finishing his sentence. Afterward, Sophie turned on Matt, angry because fear had made her hands shake and she hated that he had seen it. "I didn't need you to save me," she said. "No," Matt replied, "but he needed to know you weren't too alone." "I am alone." His gaze held hers. "Not anymore." She should have walked away then. Instead, a week later, when gunfire shattered the cafe windows just after midnight, Matt threw himself over her body and dragged her behind the counter before the first bullet hit the espresso machine. The attack was not meant for her, but after that night, she became part of his war. He took her to a safe house on the edge of the harbor. Black SUVs, silent men, a penthouse with reinforced glass, a doctor who asked no questions. A world so rich and violent it felt less like a life than a locked room wrapped in velvet. That was when she learned his real name. Matteo De Luca. Not Matt, not a wounded stranger. The youngest head of the De Luca family in 3 generations. A man feared by criminals, judges, politicians, and anyone smart enough to understand that power did not always wear a crown. Sophie should have hated him for lying. She tried, but hatred was hard to hold on to when he gave her the bedroom and slept outside the door. When he changed her bandage without letting his fingers linger. When he ordered everyone in his house to speak to her with respect. When he told her, "You can leave when it's safe," and then looked like the word leave had cost him something. Forced proximity did what danger always does. It stripped people down. Sophie saw Matteo without the myth around him, sleepless at 3 in the morning, standing before the windows with a glass of untouched whiskey, shirt sleeves rolled up, blood on his knuckles once, not his own. His expression empty until he saw her watching. "You should be afraid of me," he said. "I am," she answered. He nodded, as if that was better. Then she added, "But not for the reasons you think." His eyes lifted. That was the night everything changed. Not quickly. Not sweetly. Nothing between them was sweet. It was tension held too long. A hand almost touching her waist. Then stopping. His coat around her shoulders on the balcony. Her fingers brushing the scars across his ribs when she changed the dressing that reopened after he shielded her during a second attack. Silence stretched thin as wire. When he finally kissed her, it was after she had accused him of treating her like a fragile thing. "I am not breakable," she had whispered. Matteo looked at her mouth. "No, you are worse. Worse, you are something I could lose." The kiss was careful at first. Then it was not. By morning, he was gone. He left a note. 6 words in black ink. "You are safer without my shadow." Sophie read it once. Then again. Then she folded it neatly, placed it in her apron pocket, and went back to work with a hole in her chest where trust had briefly lived. She found out she was pregnant 7 weeks later. She did not tell him. She told herself it was because Matteo had left, because his world was violent, because no child deserved to be born into a war, because she was not going to chase a man who had decided her life for her and called it protection. All of that was true, but the deepest truth was simpler and more painful. She was afraid he would come back only for the baby, not for her. Then the letters started. No return address, no signature, just photographs of her entering the clinic, her apartment door, the cafe window, one photo of her sleeping on the bus, taken from too close. On the back of the last one, someone had written De Luca, Blood should not be raised by a waitress. That was when Matteo returned. He arrived at her apartment at dawn, black coat soaked from rain. Eyes so cold, she almost did not recognize him. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. Sophie held the door half open, her stomach just beginning to show beneath an oversized sweater. "Which part?" she replied. "That I was pregnant or that someone was stalking me because of you?" Pain moved through his face so quickly she might have imagined it. Then it disappeared. "Pack a bag." "No." "Sophie." "No." She snapped. "You don't get to vanish. Come back. And order me around. Someone put a price on you. Someone put a price on me because you brought me into your world." "I know." The admission stopped her. Matteo looked past her into the tiny apartment. The old couch. The unpaid bills stacked beside the toaster. The baby vitamins on the counter. The life she was trying to build with shaking hands and stubborn hope. "I know," he said again, quieter. "And I will spend the rest of my life paying for that." He told her the truth then. A rival family, the Santoros, had learned she was carrying his child. His uncle Vittorio, who had wanted Matteo to marry into a mafia alliance, had leaked enough information to make Sophie a target. If Matteo acknowledged her publicly without legal protection, every enemy he had would use her. If he hid her, they would hunt her anyway. So he offered a solution that sounded like a threat because everything in Matteo's world did. Marriage. Legal. Immediate. Private. "You want me to marry you for protection?" Sophie asked, staring at him in disbelief. "I want you alive." "That is not the same thing." His eyes locked on hers. "No," he said. "It is not." She almost said no. Then someone fired a shot through her apartment window. The bullet struck the wall 3 inches from the baby vitamins. Matteo moved faster than thought. He covered her body with his and took her to the floor as glass exploded across the kitchen. That was how Sophie Lane ended up in a courthouse before sunrise, wearing a pale blue dress under Matteo's black coat, while a judge with nervous hands married her to the most dangerous man in Boston. When Matteo slid the ring onto her finger, his thumb brushed her skin. "I will not ask you to love me," he said softly. "Good," Sophie whispered, because her eyes were burning. "Because I want." He nodded once, but he looked at her like he did not believe her. 16 days later, Kyle Mercer grabbed that same wrist in Bellamy's cafe, and Matteo DeLuca finally stopped hiding his wife. After the cafe incident, Matteo took Sophie through the back door before reporters could arrive. They walked into the alley behind Bellamy's, where 2 black SUVs waited with engines running. A bodyguard opened the rear door. Sophie stopped before getting inside. "No," she said. Matteo turned. "Sophie, I am not being dragged into another car because men keep deciding where I'm safe." His gaze flicked to her wrist. "You were assaulted in public. And you announced I was your wife in public? You are my wife. Legally," she said. Something dark crossed his face. "Is there another kind?" The question was too intimate, too close to the truth neither of them could touch. Sophie lifted her chin. "You didn't marry me because you loved me." Matteo stepped closer, blocking the wind with his body. "No." The word cut more than she expected. Then he said, "I married you because love would not have been enough to keep you alive." Before she could answer, his phone rang. He looked at the screen. The change in him was immediate. The husband disappeared. The mafia boss returned. What he said, a pause. His eyes moved to Sophie. "Send it." His phone buzzed. He opened a video. Sophie saw herself in the cafe. Kyle grabbing her wrist. Matteo rising. The angle was from behind the counter. Someone had recorded everything. The caption beneath the video read, Pregnant waitress claimed by Mafia boss after cafe meltdown. Sophie's stomach dropped. It's already online, Mateo said. Who posted it? His face hardened. Kyle. By sunset, the video had spread across the city. News sites blurred Sophie's face, then stopped bothering. Gossip pages called her Mateo De Luca's mystery wife. Some comments called her lucky. Some called her a gold digger. Some asked whose baby she carried. Others posted old photos of Kyle with his arm around her waist, turning her life into entertainment for strangers. Sophie sat in Mateo's penthouse, staring at the screen, until her vision blurred. The penthouse was beautiful in a way that felt lonely. Floor-to-ceiling windows, marble floors, a fireplace that burned without sound, security monitors hidden behind a panel in the study, men posted outside the elevator, women in tailored suits whispering into earpieces. A palace with locks. Mateo stood across the room, speaking quietly to his men. Find Mercer. Find who sent him the cafe angle. Pull every camera within 6 blocks. Sophie looked up. You had cameras in the cafe, Mateo went still. That silence was enough. Her heart sank. Mateo, it was for your protection. You were watching me after the letters. Yes, she rose carefully. One hand on the arm of the chair. You don't get to make that sound noble. His men began to leave. Mateo did not take his eyes off her. I had reason. You always have reason. That's the problem. He dismissed the last guard with a glance. The door shut. Then it was just them. The city glittered behind him like a field of knives. Sophie walked toward the study and pushed open the door. The security panel was still lit. On one screen was Bellamy's cafe. On another, the hallway outside her apartment. On another, the clinic entrance. She stopped breathing. Mateo followed but did not touch her. How long? She asked. Since the first photograph arrived. You should have told me. Yes. His honesty made her angrier. She turned on him. You don't get points for admitting it after I catch you. I know. Do you? Because you keep saying you want me safe. But you never ask what safety feels like to me. His expression changed then. Not softened. Mateo rarely softened. But something in him cracked open just enough for her to see the fear underneath. What does it feel like? He asked. Sophie's anger faltered. He stepped closer. Slowly. Tell me. She looked away because if she looked at him too long, she remembered the safe house. His coat on her shoulders. His body over hers as bullets hit glass. The way he had said she was something he could lose. Safety feels like having a choice, she said. Mateo absorbed that like a wound. Then he nodded. Then choose. She looked back at him. His voice lowered. Stay here tonight because Kyle is working with someone who wants you dead. Tomorrow, if you still want to leave, I will give you a driver. Guards you can fire. And an apartment no one knows about. You would let me go, no. Her heart tightened. Mateo's eyes were ruthless and honest. But I would not stop you. The distinction was pure Mateo. Possessive enough to terrify her. Restrained enough to make her trust him. Before she could answer, a sharp pain tightened across her stomach. Sophie inhaled suddenly and pressed her hand below her ribs. Mateo moved. He was in front of her instantly. All control gone from his face. What is it? I'm fine. Sophie. The baby kicked. She whispered. The fear in his eyes froze. Then his gaze dropped to her stomach. For a moment, the most feared man in Boston looked afraid to breathe. Sophie could have stepped away. She did not. Slowly, she took his hand and placed it against the curve of her belly. The baby moved again. Mateo closed his eyes. Not for long, only a second. But Sophie saw it. A man who never bowed to kings had been undone by something smaller than his palm. When he opened his eyes, the room between them had changed. He did not smile. He simply whispered, "Again." And despite everything, Sophie almost laughed through tears. The moment shattered when his phone rang again. Matteo answered. His face hardened. "What happened?" He listened. Then his eyes lifted to Sophie. "Kyle disappeared," he said, "and my uncle just arrived in Boston." Vittorio De Luca came to the penthouse the next morning, carrying an old family name like a weapon. He was Matteo's father's brother, a silver-haired man with polished shoes, cold eyes, and the kind of smile powerful men used when they wanted cruelty to look like manners. He arrived with two attorneys, a priest, and a woman in emerald silk named Viviana Santoro. Sophie stood beside the fireplace wearing a cream sweater dress that barely fit over her stomach. Matteo stood near the window in black, his hands loose at his sides, his face unreadable. Vittorio looked Sophie up and down. "So this is the waitress," he said. Matteo's voice cut through the room. "Careful." Vittorio smiled. "I am being careful. If I were not, I would say what everyone else is thinking." Viviana stepped forward. "All diamonds and red lipstick. That she is temporary." Sophie's fingers curled. Matteo did not move, but the room seemed to darken around him. Viviana continued, her eyes on Sophie's ring. "Matteo made a sentimental mistake. Men do that when a woman cries at the right time." Sophie felt heat rise in her face. Before Matteo could speak, she did. "I didn't cry." Viviana's smile sharpened. "No, no," Sophie said. "I was too busy being shot at." The attorney shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, Matteo looked at Sophie with something almost like pride. Vittorio placed a folder on the table. "Annulment papers," he said. "Sign them. The child, if it is Matteo S., can be handled privately." The temperature in the room dropped. Matteo turned his head slowly. "What did you say?" Vittorio spread his hands. "This family cannot be led by scandal. A pregnant waitress with a violent ex and uncertain history is not a wife. She is a liability." Sophie's throat closed. There it was again. The old wound. Woman as problem. Woman as mistake. Woman as something to be corrected by men in expensive rooms. Matteo walked to the table. He picked up the folder. For one breath, Sophie thought he might throw it. Instead, he opened it, looked at the papers, and calmly held them over the fire. The pages caught. Flames curled around legal language, turning signatures and threats into ash. Viviana gasped. Vittorio's face hardened. Matteo watched the papers burn. Then he looked at his uncle. "You will not speak of my wife as if she is a contract clause." Vittorio stepped closer. "You would start a war over her." Matteo's eyes did not blink. "No," he said. "I would finish one." Sophie should have felt protected. She did. But she also felt the cage tightening. Because men like Vittorio would not stop. Kyle would not stop. The Santoros would not stop. And Matteo, for all his restraint with her, was still a man made of violence and control. Loving him would not make the danger disappear. It would only give the danger a name. That afternoon, Sophie found Matteo in the lower garage beside a row of black SUVs. He was speaking to his second-in-command, Roman. When she approached, "I want to go to the clinic tomorrow," she said. Matteo turned. "The doctor can come here." "No, I want one normal appointment. One normal hour where I am not treated like a hostage or a bomb." Roman looked away. Matteo studied her. "You know it is not safe." "I know nothing has been safe since I met you." The words hit him. She saw it before he hit it. Roman cleared his throat. We can secure the route. Mateo's gaze stayed on Sophie. You are asking for a choice. I am taking one. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he nodded once. Tomorrow morning, Sophie expected conditions, a lecture, a fight. Instead, Mateo turned to Roman. 3 cars. No visible weapons near the clinic entrance. She walks in like a person, not a prisoner. Sophie stared at him. Mateo looked back. I listen, he said quietly. Slowly, the clinic appointment began normally. That was what made the attack feel unreal. The waiting room was painted pale yellow. A television played a morning talk show with the volume low. Pregnant women flipped through magazines. A nurse smiled at Sophie and told her the baby's heartbeat sounded strong. Mateo waited outside the exam room because Sophie asked him to. She could see him through the frosted glass, standing in the hallway with his back to the wall, black coat open, eyes scanning everyone who passed. He looked out of place among pastel walls and baby posters, like a shadow that had wandered into daylight. When the doctor left, Sophie stepped into the hallway. Mateo straightened. Well, he asked. She tried not to smile. She's stubborn. His face changed. Sophie froze. She had not meant to tell him like that. His eyes moved over her face. A girl, he asked softly. Sophie nodded. The hallway noise faded. For a second, Mateo looked like the floor had shifted beneath him. A daughter, he whispered. Then the front windows exploded. The first shot cracked through the clinic entrance. People screamed. Mateo moved before Sophie understood what was happening. He pulled her behind him, one arm around her shoulders, the other drawing a gun from beneath his coat with terrifying ease. Down, he ordered. Bodyguards surged through the hallway. A nurse cried out. Alarms screamed. Glass rained across the waiting room tile. Mateo pressed Sophie against the inner wall, his body shielding hers completely. Look at me, he said. She was shaking too hard to answer. Sophie, look at me. She did. His face was inches from hers, calm and deadly. But his eyes were not calm at all. Breathe for her, he said. The baby. Their daughter. Sophie dragged in air. Another shot hit the wall near them. Mateo flinched. Not from fear, but because a shard of glass cut across his temple. Blood ran down the side of his face. Mateo, infine. You re-bleeding. Not enough. He guided her through a side exit while his men returned fire outside. The world became noise and motion. Rubber burning. Car doors slamming. Roman shouting commands. Mateo's arm locked around her as he pushed her into an SUV and climbed in after her. The convoy tore away from the clinic. Sophie looked back through the rear window and saw smoke drifting across the street. Her normal hour had lasted 9 minutes. They did not return to the penthouse. Mateo took her to an abandoned church on the edge of the city, a DeLuca-safe location, hidden behind boarded windows and ivy-covered stone. Inside, candles had been lit along the altar. Not for religion, Mateo told her, but because electricity made the building easier to track. Rain began outside, tapping against stained glass. Sophie sat in the front pew while Mateo leaned against the aisle, blood drying at his temple. One hand pressed to his ribs where an old wound had reopened. You need a doctor, she said. So do you. The baby is moving. Imi ona. He looked at her stomach with the haunted expression he tried to hide. You could have died today. So could you. I am used to that. Well, I'm not. Her voice broke at the end. Mateo looked away. That hurt more than anger would have. Sophie stood, walked to him. and took the first aid kit from Roman's hands before the guard could protest. "Sit down," she said. Matteo looked at her. I said sit. Roman suddenly found the floor very interesting. Matteo sat in the pew. Sophie cleaned the cut at his temple. Her fingers trembled. He watched her so closely she could barely breathe. "Stop looking at me like that," she whispered. "Like what? Like you re-memorizing me." His voice was low. "I am." Her hand stilled. Matteo's jaw tightened, as if he regretted saying it. But he did not take it back. Sophie continued cleaning the wound. "Why? Because every time I close my eyes, I see the shot hitting the glass near your head." That isn't an answer. His gaze lifted to hers. "Because if I lose you, there will be nothing human left in me." The confession moved through her like lightning. Not soft, not romantic in any ordinary way. It was terrifying because she believed him. Sophie stepped back. "You can say things like that and then decide everything for me. I know. You can love someone by locking them away." His face went still. There it was, the word neither of them had used. Love. Matteo stood slowly. He was too close now. Close enough that she could see rain reflected in his eyes through the broken colors of stained glass. "I do not know how to love safely," he said. Sophie's throat tightened. "I only know how to love like war." A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. Matteo lifted his hand, stopped before touching her, waited. That broke her more than if he had pulled her into his arms. Sophie closed the distance herself. She stepped into him, pressing her face against his chest. For 1 second, Matteo did not move. Then his arms came around her, careful because of the baby, fierce because of everything else. Outside, thunder rolled over the harbor. Inside the abandoned church, the Mafia boss held his wife like a man afraid God would notice and take her away. The betrayal came from someone Sophie trusted. Lena had worked beside Sophie at Bellamy's for 2 years. She was the one who covered Sophie's shifts during morning sickness, the one who brought ginger tea, the one who cried when Sophie said she was married. Not because she was happy, but because she knew secrets that big usually came with bruises. So when Roman brought Lena into the church basement with tears streaking her mascara, Sophie's first instinct was denial. "No," Sophie said. Lena subbed. "I'm sorry." Matteo stood in the shadows beside the old wine cellar, silent and lethal. Roman placed a phone on the table. Massage, payment transfers, photos. Lena had sent Kyle Sophia's clinic appointment, cafe, schedule, and apartment address. Sophie felt the room tilt. "Why?" she whispered. Lena covered her mouth. "My brother owed money. Kyle said no one would get hurt. He said Matteo was using you. He said he only wanted to talk to you." Sophie stared at her. "You watched him grab me." Lena cried harder. "I know." Sophie backed away. Matteo moved. But she raised a hand to stop him. No one spoke. That hurt more than Kyle. Kyle had always been cruel. Lena had been kind. Betrayal from kindness leaves a different scar. Matteo's voice was cold when he addressed Roman. "Take her home. Put guards on her brother. No one touches them until Sophie decides." Lena looked up, stunned. So did Sophie. Matteo did not look at Lena. He looked at his wife. "Her pain belongs to you," he said. "Not me." Something inside Sophie shifted. It was not forgiveness. Not yet, but it was the first time Matteo had handed her power instead of taking it. Later that night, Sophie found him standing alone near the ruined altar. "You surprised me," she said. "I surprise myself around you." She almost smiled. But the day had been too heavy. What happens now? Now Kyle runs out of people to hide behind. And the Santoros, they made a mistake. What mistake? Mateo turned from the altar. They aimed at you and missed. The next morning, Kyle sent a video. He stood inside what looked like a dark theater. Rows of empty red seats behind him. Stage lights glowing weakly overhead. His face was bruised from someone else's anger, but his smile remained sharp. "Hi, Sophie," he said. "I know you're rewatching." Mateo stood beside her in the church office as the video played on Romanes's laptop. Kyle lifted Sophie's old apartment key between two fingers. "You always did run to the wrong man. First me, then him. But here's the thing about men like Matteo DeLuca. They don't love women like you. They collect them, use them, hide behind them when they need sympathy." Sophie's hands curled over her stomach. Kyle's smile widened. "Come alone." Sophie. Midnight. The Orpheum Theater. Or I release the clinic records. The videos. The photos. Everything. I'll let the whole city decide if that baby is really his. Mateo reached for the laptop. Sophie stopped him. Kyle leaned closer to the camera. "And bring the ring. And I want to watch you take it off." The video ended. Silence. Then Mateo picked up the laptop and threw it against the wall. It shattered. Sophie flinched. Mateo froze when he saw. The rage left his face instantly, replaced by something worse. Shame. "I'm sorry," he said. She believed him. But fear had memory, and her body remembered before her heart could decide. Mateo stepped back, giving her space. "I will not let him near you. He wants me there. He wants bait. He wants control." Sophie said. "There's a difference." Mateo's eyes narrowed. Sophie looked at the broken laptop. "Kyle doesn't just want to expose me. He wants to make me choose humiliation. He wants me to walk in and hand him proof that he still has power over me. And you think I will allow that?" "No," she said. "I think you will storm in with guns and make it about your war." His face hardened. "It is my war. It is my wrist." He grabbed. "My name," he dragged online. "My friend," he manipulated. "My child," he threatened. Mateo went very still. Sophie stepped closer. "I am not asking you to stay away. I am asking you not to erase me from my own rescue." For a long time, he said nothing. Then he looked at Roman. "Get her a vest." And Sophie blinked. Roman looked like he wanted to argue, then wisely did not. Mateo turned back to her. "You do exactly what I say if bullets start flying." Sophie lifted her chin. "And you do exactly what I say if he tries to make this about ownership." A dangerous flicker moved through Mateo's eyes. Not anger, fascination. "You are very difficult to protect," he said. "You are very difficult to love." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Both of them froze. Mateo's face changed slowly, like a locked door opening in the dark. "Sophie," he said. She looked away. "Don't." He did not move closer, but his voice reached her anyway. "I heard you." At midnight, the Orpheum Theater looked like a dead thing, pretending to sleep. The marquee lights flickered above the empty entrance. Rain slicked the street. Black SUVs rolled silently into the alley behind the building. Headlights off. Mateo's men moved like shadows through side doors and fire escapes. Sophie wore Mateo's coat over a protective vest, her ring cold against her finger. Mateo stood beside her backstage, checking the earpiece Roman had placed beneath her hair. "You stay where I can see you," he said. "No." His eyes snapped to hers. "I stand where he can see me," Sophie said. "That's the point." His jaw tightened. Every instinct in him rebelled. She could see it. The need to put his body between her and everything else. The urge to lock the world out with blood and steel. But he nodded. Barely. That tiny nod felt more intimate than a kiss. Sophie walked onto the stage. The theater smelled like dust, velvet, and old applause. Kyle stood beneath a single spotlight near the front row. Beside him was Enzo Santoro, heir to the rival family, smiling with a gun loose at his side. Several armed men lined the aisles. Kyle clapped slowly when Sophie appeared. "There she is," he said. "Mrs. DeLuca." Sophie stopped center stage. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. But her voice was steady. "You wanted me. I'm here." Kyle looked disappointed that she was not crying. His gaze dropped to her stomach. Then her hand. "The ring?" he said. "No." His smile twitched. "Still pretending he chose you. He did choose me." Kyle laughed. "He chose the baby. Men like him need heirs. That's all. You are a convenient womb with a sad little face." The words struck, but they did not enter the way they once would have. Because from the darkness beyond the stage, Sophie felt Matteo watching. Not controlling, trusting. Kyle stepped closer. "Take it off." Sophie looked down at the ring. She remembered the courthouse. Matteo's thumb against her skin. His voice saying he would not ask her to love him. She remembered the cafe. Kyle's hand crushing her wrist. She remembered the clinic glass exploding. The abandoned church. The baby kicking beneath Matteo's palm. Then she looked at Kyle. "No," she said. "You don't get to decide what I'm worthy of anymore." Kyle's face twisted. He lunged for her. Matteo appeared from the shadows like a nightmare given shape. He caught Kyle by the throat and slammed him back against the edge of the stage, hard enough to make the spotlight shake. Every gun in the theater lifted. So did every DeLuca weapon from the dark balconies. The room became a held breath. Matteo's voice was soft. "I warned you in the cafe." Kyle choked, clawing at Matteo's wrist. Enzo Santoro raised his gun towards Sophie. Sophie saw it before anyone else. Matteo. Matteo turned just as Enzo fired. Roman shot the stage light. Darkness crashed down. Screams. Gunfire. Shattering glass. Men shouting in Italian and English. Sophie dropped behind a speaker, both arms around her stomach, breathing the way Matteo had taught her. "Breathe for her." A hand grabbed her ankle. "Kyle." Even in chaos, he found her. He dragged himself toward her, face wild with hatred. "You ruined my life." He spat. Sophie kicked free, but he caught her wrist again. The same wrist. The same ring. The same old terror. But Sophie was not the same woman. She grabbed the heavy stage microphone stand beside her and swung it with both hands. It struck Kyle's arm. He cried out and released her. Then Matteo was there. Blood marked his white shirt beneath his black coat. But he moved like pain belonged to someone else. He lifted Kyle by the collar and drove him into the front row seats. Enzo tried to run through the aisle. Roman stopped him. The remaining Santoro men dropped their weapons when they realized every exit belonged to DeLuca. Matteo stood over Kyle, breathing hard, gun in hand. Sophie saw what he wanted to do. She saw how close he was to becoming the monster everyone said he was. "Matteo," she said. His eyes remained on Kyle. "He threatened you." "I know." "He threatened our daughter." "I know." His hand tightened around the gun. Sophie stepped closer, shaking. "If you do this for me, you don't do it in front of me." That reached him. Slowly, Matteo turned. His face was terrifying. Blood at his temple. Rainwater on his coat. Rage in every line of his body. But beneath it was fear. The fear of losing her. The fear of being unworthy of the one person who had seen him as more than his violence. Sophie held out her hand. Not the ring hand. The other. Matteo stared at it. Then he lowered the gun. The sound of it hitting the stage floor echoed through the theater. Kyle laughed weakly. She made you weak. Matteo looked down at him. No, he said. She gave me something to spare. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Not ordinary police. Judges and officers Matteo trusted because he owned their secrets or their loyalty. Kyle and Enzo would not disappear. They would stand trial with enough evidence to bury both families' public faces and enough fear to keep their private ones silent. But before they were taken, Kyle looked at Sophie one last time. You think he loves you, he spat. Ask him when he knew. Sophie went still. Matteo's expression changed. Too late. Kyle smiled through blood on his lip. Ask him when he knew the baby was his. The theater tilted. Sophie turned to Matteo. What does he mean? Matteo said nothing. That silence was worse than confession. Sophie stepped back. No, she whispered. Tell me he's lying. Matteo's face was stripped bare now. I knew before the courthouse. Her breath left her. How the clinic records. My men found them when we traced the first thread. You knew, yes. You knew she was yours and didn't tell me I was going to. When, after you locked me in a penthouse, after you decided what was safe, after you let me believe you married me out of obligation, his pain was quiet. That made it harder. I married you before I saw the records. Matteo said. Sophie froze. He stepped closer, but stopped when she stepped back. The judge signed the paperwork at 6:12 that morning. He said, Roman got the records at 6:47. I did not know she was mine when I put the ring on your finger. Tears filled Sophie's eyes. Then why hide it? His voice broke on the edge of control. Because the second I knew, I became worse. She stared at him. Matteo looked down, as if ashamed of his own heart. I could pretend I was protecting you because it was right, because I owed you, because you were innocent. But when I knew she was mine, he swallowed. I wanted to keep you, both of you. I wanted it so badly I did not trust myself to tell you without making it sound like a claim. Sophie's ange tremble. Not gone, but changed. You let me feel alone with that fear. I know. You let Kyle's words hurt me when you could have stopped them. His eyes lifted. Yes, the honesty hurt, but lies would have hurt more. Sophie wiped her cheek. I don't know how to forgive that tonight. Matteo nodded once. I will wait. She laughed bitterly through tears. You don't wait. For you, he said. I have been learning. The baby moved beneath her hand. Sophie closed her eyes. The theater around them was broken. Police lights flashed red and blue through the rain-streaked doors. Men were being dragged into the aisles. Matteo stood before her bleeding. Powerful, guilty, and completely hers in a way that still terrified her. She did not fall into his arms. Not then. Instead, she said, take me home. His face flickered. The penthouse, no. She looked toward the ruined stage. Then back at him. Our home. But I choose the room. I choose the locks. I choose who watches the doors. And tomorrow, you tell me everything. No more secrets dressed up as protection. Matteo bowed his head once. Not as a boss. As a husband, everything, he said. 3 weeks later, Bellamy's cafe reopened. Not as it had been. The broken windows were replaced. The tile was repaired. The counter had been rebuilt with warm wood and brass edges. Fresh flowers sat on every table. The old sign remained outside. But beneath it, in smaller gold lettering, was a new name. Lane Bellamy. Sophie had refused when Matteo first handed her the ownership papers. Then she read the note attached. Not a gift. A debt repaid to the woman who saved my life before she knew my name. She signed only after changing the agreement, so the cafe belonged solely to her. Mateo had looked offended for half a second, then proud for much longer. The opening day was sunny. Boston glittered after rain. The streets washed clean. The air cool and bright. Customers lined up before noon. Some came for coffee. Some came because the scandal had made Sophie famous. Some came hoping to glimpse Matteo De Luca. They did. He sat in the same corner booth where he had once pretended to be Matt, wearing a black suit, one hand resting on the table, his wedding ring visible. No bodyguards stood inside. Sophie had allowed two outside. That was marriage. She had told him. Compromise. Matteo had said, compromise looks suspiciously like surrender. Sophie had smiled. Only when you're losing. He had looked at her then with the quiet devotion that still made her heart unsteady. Now she moved between tables. No longer in a waitress uniform, but in a soft blue dress, one hand on her belly, greeting customers as the owner. Kyle Mercer awaited trial. Enzo Santoro had turned on his own family. Vittorio De Luca had fled Boston after Matteo released enough evidence to destroy every alliance he had spent 30 years building. The war was not over. Men like Matteo did not get peaceful endings. But for the first time, Sophie no longer felt like a woman standing outside the story of her own life. She had chosen the danger with open eyes, and the danger had learned to kneel. Near closing, the cafe emptied until only Matteo remained. Sophie locked the front door and turned the sign. When she faced him, he was standing, Yuri staring. She said, "Yes, you do that a lot. I missed years of it." Her chest softened. He walked toward her slowly, giving her time to move away if she wanted. She did not. He stopped in front of her and looked down at her hand. The red marks from Kyle's grip had faded. Matteo touched her wrist gently, almost reverently. "I still see it," he said. "I know. I still hear him telling you to take off the ring." Sophie placed her hand over his. "And I still hear you telling him who put it there." His eyes lifted. The city outside moved beyond the glass. Cars passing. People laughing. A world unaware that inside this small cafe, something dangerous had become something tender without ever becoming tame. Matteo lowered himself slowly to one knee. Sophie's breath caught. "Matteo." He took her hand. Not the way Kyle had. Never that way. He held it like something trusted. Not owned. "I married you in fear," he said. "I protected you badly. I loved you worse. I kept secrets because I thought truth would give you a reason to leave." Tears blurred her vision. He looked up at her. "So I am asking now, with no judge, no VAR, no gunfire, and no lie between us." His thumb brushed the ring. "Stay my wife because you choose me. Not because I saved you. Not because of our daughter. Not because my name scares the world. Because somewhere inside all this darkness, you still see the man who drank bad coffee just to hear your voice." Sophie laughed through her tears. "It was terrible coffee. The worst. You came back anyway. Every night." She touched his face. The feared Matteo De Luca closed his eyes beneath her palm. There he was. Not soft. Never harmless. But hers. Sophie lowered herself carefully until she was kneeling in front of him too. Both of them on the cafe floor, where months ago a tray had shattered and a man from her past had tried to tear away her future. She kissed Matteo gently. His hand came to her waist, stopping first, asking without words. She answered by leaning closer. When they parted, Sophie whispered, "I choose you." His forehead rested against hers. The baby kicked between them. Matteo gave a quiet, breathless laugh. the rare kind that seemed to surprise even him. Our daughter agrees, Sophie said. She is already giving orders. She gets that from you. His eyes warmed. No, he said. From her mother. Outside, two black SUVs waited at the curb. Men in dark suits watched the street. Somewhere beyond the city lights, enemies were counting losses and planning revenge. But inside the cafe, sunlight faded into gold across the floor. Sophie Lane stood with her husband's hand in hers, no longer hiding the ring. The woman Kyle Mercer had called unwanted had become the one person Matteo DeLuca would burn the world to protect. And the mafia boss who once believed love was only another weakness had learned the most dangerous truth of all. A man with nothing to lose is feared, but a man with a wife and daughter to come home to is unstoppable. Matteo opened the cafe door for Sophie, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back. Not pushing, not claiming, just there. This time, she did not walk behind him. She walked beside him. And every man watching from the shadows understood. The waitress with the ring had not been rescued from the underworld. She had become its queen.